It started as just another fun night on The Tonight Show, until Jimmy froze mid-laugh and watched a teenager do something that would change television forever. The studio was electric with that familiar Tonight Show energy. The blue and gold lights cast their warm glow across the iconic set as the Roots filled the air with their signature sound. Jimmy Fallon sat behind his desk in his perfectly tailored navy suit, that infectious grin lighting up his face as he bantered with the audience. Everything felt exactly as it should. Comfortable, predictable, safe. Gaten Matarazzo walked onto the stage to thunderous applause. At 19, the Stranger Things star carried himself with the confidence of someone who'd grown up in the spotlight. But there was something different about him tonight. Something in his eyes that Jimmy couldn't quite read. The audience loved him immediately, his curly hair bouncing as he waved, his signature smile beaming under the stage lights. Gaten Matarazzo. Everybody, Jimmy announced with his usual enthusiasm, rising to shake hands with the young actor, star of Stranger Things, Broadway veteran, and honestly one of the coolest kids I know. They settled into their chairs, and the interview began exactly as scripted. Jimmy asked about the final season of Stranger Things, about his Broadway dreams, about growing up famous. Gaten answered with charm and wit, making the audience laugh with his stories about the cast. Everything was going perfectly, but during a commercial break, as makeup artists touched up their faces and producers checked camera angles, Gaten turned to Jimmy with an expression that made the host pause. "Jimmy," he said quietly, "can I show them something real?" The lights came back up, the cameras rolled, and Jimmy introduced the next segment with his usual energy. But something had shifted. He could feel it in the way Gaten sat forward in his chair, in the way the young actor's hands trembled slightly. "So, Gaten," Jimmy said, following the script but watching his guest carefully, "you've been pretty open about your condition, cleidocranial dysplasia. For people who don't know, can you tell us what that means?" Gaten nodded, his smile still there, but different now, more serious. "It's a genetic condition that affects my bones and teeth," he began, his voice steady. "I was born without collarbones, and my teeth, well, they don't grow in like most people's." The audience listened politely, but Jimmy sensed this was leading somewhere unscripted. "The thing is," Gaten continued, his voice growing stronger, "I've spent most of my life wearing these." He gestured to his mouth, and Jimmy realized what was coming. The studio fell completely silent. "Dentures. Since I was a kid. And tonight, I want to do something I've never done on television before." Jimmy's heart started racing. This wasn't in any notes. This wasn't planned. But something in Gaten's eyes told him this moment mattered more than any script. "I want to show people what I really look like," Gaten said, reaching toward his mouth. "Because maybe there's some kid watching who needs to know it's okay to be different." The camera stayed focused on Gaten as he carefully removed his dentures. The transformation was immediate and profound. Without his teeth, his face changed completely, his speech altered, his appearance vulnerable in a way that hit everyone in the studio like a physical force. Jimmy felt his throat tighten. In all his years of hosting through thousands of interviews and unexpected moments, he'd never witnessed courage like this. "This is me," Gaten said, his voice now carrying a slight lisp, but filled with strength. "This is what cleidocranial dysplasia looks like. And for the longest time, I was ashamed of it." The audience was completely silent. Jimmy could hear the hum of the cameras, the whisper of air conditioning, his own heartbeat. This wasn't entertainment anymore. This was something sacred. "When I was little," Gaten continued, "kids would stare. They'd call me names. I wanted to hide, to never smile, to never let anyone see the real me. But then Stranger Things happened. And the writers, they didn't want me to hide it. They made it part of Dustin's story." Jimmy found himself leaning forward, completely captivated. He'd interviewed hundreds of celebrities, but this felt different. This felt like witnessing something that transcended television. "And you know what I learned?" Gaten asked, looking directly at Jimmy, then into the camera. I learned that the thing I was most afraid to show the world became the thing people loved most about me. That's when Jimmy made a decision that surprised everyone, including himself. He stood up from behind his desk, walked around to Gaten's chair, and without saying a word, knelt down beside him. The camera operators adjusted their angles, but this wasn't about getting the perfect shot anymore. This was about being present for a moment that mattered. "Gaten," Jimmy said, his voice thick with emotion. "Do you know how brave you are?" The young actor shook his head, tears beginning to form in his eyes. "No, seriously," Jimmy continued. "I've been doing this show for years. I've met presidents, movie stars, musicians. But what you just did, that's the bravest thing I've ever seen on this stage." He looked out at the audience, then back at the cameras. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is what real courage looks like. Not hiding who you are, but showing the world your truth and helping others find theirs." The audience began to respond, not with polite applause, but with something deeper. People were standing, some crying, many looking at their phones, as if suddenly seeing their own reflection differently. Jimmy reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a handkerchief. Without asking, he gently wiped the tears from Gaten's face. "You said maybe there's some kid watching who needs to know it's okay to be different," Jimmy said. "Well, I think there are adults watching too. People who have been hiding parts of themselves, afraid to be seen." He stood up slowly, then did something unprecedented. He began removing his own suit jacket, the same jacket he wore for every single taping, the one that had become part of his television persona. "This jacket," Jimmy said, holding it in his hands, "has been with me through every show. It's seen laughter and tears, surprises and scripted moments. But tonight, it's going to someone who showed us what it really means to be yourself." He draped the jacket over Gaten's shoulders. The young actor looked small inside it, but somehow stronger too. "I want you to keep this," Jimmy said. "And whenever you doubt yourself, whenever you forget how incredible you are, I want you to remember this moment. Remember that tonight, you changed lives just by being yourself." Gaten looked up at Jimmy, then out at the audience that was now on its feet, applauding not just for entertainment but for recognition of something profound. "Thank you," Gaten whispered, his voice barely audible but picked up by the microphones. "Thank you for seeing me." Jimmy returned to his desk, but the energy in the room had completely shifted. When he looked at his notes, the questions seemed irrelevant now. "You know what?" Jimmy said, setting his cards aside. "I think we're done with questions tonight. This conversation just reminded me why I do this job. It's not about the jokes or the games, or even the guests. It's about moments like this, when someone trusts you enough to show you who they really are." He looked at Gaten, still wearing his jacket, having put his dentures back in, but somehow looking different now, freer. "Thank you, Gaten," Jimmy said. "Thank you for reminding all of us that our differences aren't things to hide. They're things to celebrate." The show ended differently that night. No musical guest, no comedy bit, just Jimmy and Gaten sitting together, talking about courage and authenticity while the audience listened to every word. But the magic didn't end when the cameras stopped rolling. As the studio audience slowly filed out, something unprecedented happened. People weren't rushing to leave like they normally did. Instead, they lingered, many approaching Gaten with tears in their eyes. A teenage girl with braces stepped forward hesitantly. "I've been hiding my smile for 2 years," she whispered to Gaten. "Thank you for showing me I don't have to." An elderly man with a prosthetic arm waited patiently in line. When his turn came, he simply said, 60 years I've been covering this up. 60 years. Tonight, that changes." Jimmy watched from the side of the stage as Gaten became something more than an actor in that moment. He became a beacon of hope for everyone who had ever felt different, broken, or less than whole. The production assistants tried to maintain schedule, but Jimmy raised his hand to stop them. "Let this happen," he said quietly. "This is bigger than television." A mother approached with her young son, maybe 8 years old, who was missing several teeth due to a similar condition. The boy looked up at Gaten with wonder, not pity, but pure admiration. "Are you really Dustin?" the boy asked. "I'm Gaten," he replied, kneeling down to the child's level, while still wearing Jimmy's oversized jacket. "And I think you and I have something special in common." The boy nodded eagerly, then surprised everyone by reaching into his mouth and removing his own partial denture. "Mine too," he said proudly, showing his gap-toothed grin. Gaten's eyes filled with tears as he looked at this brave little boy. "You know what? You're even braver than me. I'm 19 and it took me this long to show people. You're already a superhero." Jimmy felt his own emotions threatening to overwhelm him. In 20 years of hosting, he'd never seen anything like this raw, unfiltered moment of human connection. The boy's mother was crying now. "He's been so self-conscious," she told Gaten. "He won't smile in photos, won't play with other kids at school. Tonight, watching you, I think you just changed his life." One by one, more people shared their stories. A teenager with a cleft palate spoke about finally feeling beautiful. A young woman with a facial birthmark talked about learning to love her reflection. An older gentleman with a stutter shared how Gaten's courage reminded him that his voice mattered, exactly as it was. Jimmy realized he was witnessing something that transcended entertainment. This wasn't just a talk show moment anymore. This was a movement beginning right there in his studio. "Gaten," Jimmy said, approaching the group that had gathered around the young actor, "I think we need to talk." 3 hours later, long after the crew had finished packing up, Jimmy and Gaten sat alone on the empty stage. The bright lights had been dimmed, leaving only the warm glow of the exit signs and the distant twinkle of the New York skyline visible through the windows. "Do you know what you started tonight?" Jimmy asked, his voice soft in the quiet studio. Gaten shrugged, still wearing the host's jacket like a comfortable blanket. "I just wanted to be honest. I'm tired of pretending to be something I'm not." "That little boy," Jimmy continued. "His mother gave me her card before they left. She wants to start a support group for kids with dental differences. She said watching you tonight was the first time her son smiled without covering his mouth since his diagnosis." Jimmy pulled out his phone and showed Gaten the screen. "This has been trending for the past 2 hours. Courage behind the smile. Look at these posts." Together, they scrolled through thousands of messages. Photos of people showing their differences proudly. Stories of courage inspired by one teenager's decision to be authentic on live television. Videos of children taking out their retainers. Adults removing their prosthetics. Teenagers showing their scars for the first time. "This is what happens when someone chooses truth over comfort," Jimmy said. "You didn't just share your story tonight. You gave millions of people permission to share theirs." Gaten wiped his eyes with the sleeve of Jimmy's jacket. "My whole life, I thought my condition was something to hide. Even on Stranger Things, even when they wrote it into the show, I still felt like I was pretending to be okay with it. And now?" Jimmy asked. "Now I realize it was never about hiding it. It was about showing people that different doesn't mean broken. That the things that make us unique are actually our superpowers." Jimmy stood up and walked to the edge of the stage, looking out at the empty audience seats. "You know what we're going to do? We're going to start something. A platform, a movement, whatever you want to call it. We're going to make sure that what happened here tonight doesn't end here." "What do you mean?" Gaten asked, joining him at the edge of the stage. "I mean, we're going to create spaces for people to tell their stories. We're going to partner with organizations that support kids like that little boy. We're going to use this platform to remind the world that perfect isn't real, but courage is." The idea took shape as they talked, a monthly segment dedicated to real stories of difference and acceptance. A scholarship fund for kids with medical conditions who wanted to pursue performing arts. A campaign to encourage authenticity over perfection. "The jacket," Jimmy said suddenly, "I want you to keep it, but I also want it to become something more. Every month when we do this segment, whoever shares their story gets to wear it. It becomes a symbol of courage passing from one person to the next. Gaten smiled. The first completely unguarded smile Jimmy had seen from him all night. You really mean that, kid? Tonight you reminded me why I got into this business in the first place. Not for the ratings or the celebrity interviews, but for moments like these, when television stops being entertainment and starts being ministry. Later, the producers would tell Jimmy that the episode broke viewing records, not because of celebrity gossip or viral moments, but because millions of people recognized something real in a world that often feels manufactured. The jacket remained with Gaten, and in the months that followed, photos of him wearing it to premieres and award shows became symbols of authentic self-acceptance. But more importantly, it traveled from person to person during their monthly Courage Behind the Smile segments, each new wearer adding their story to its legacy. The little boy from that first night became their youngest guest, confidently sharing his journey and inspiring thousands more children to embrace their differences. The teenage girl with braces started a blog about self-acceptance that reached millions. The elderly man with the prosthetic became an advocate for disability rights. Jimmy kept a photo from that night on his desk. Not the posed publicity shot, but a candid moment caught by a photographer. Him kneeling beside a brave young man who chose vulnerability over vanity, truth over image, courage over comfort. Because sometimes the most powerful performances happen when the masks come off, when the pretense falls away, and when someone brave enough to show their true face reminds us all what it really means to be beautifully, courageously, authentically human.